All right, this last video of the semester. Thank you for your patience as I was sort of figuring out the new learning management system, new to me anyway. So this last one's going to be kind of a mishmash of oceans. So I want to put a little bit of international law related to the oceans and the polar regions in there in this as well. So the first one here, slide 2, is just very much a highlight of a thing called the Law of the Sea Treaty, or UNCLOS 3, UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. So now the UN is of course not a government. It's what's called an IGO, an intergovernmental organization. But the convention is a treaty. So when you hear the word treaty, the word treaty may not always be used. So convention is a treaty. Sometimes a protocol can be a treaty, like the Kyoto Protocols, which were an environmental treaty. The Geneva Conventions are a series of treaties dealing with prisoners of war and all that kind of stuff. So don't be thrown off by the title necessarily. But some of the things here, like territorial waters and borders, and when does all that begin, are dealt with in this huge compilation of agreements called the Convention on the Law of the Sea, which was passed in 1982 and is quite frankly probably due for some upgrades or updates, given the nature and the technological advancement and all that. But nevertheless, so a couple things. One is it deals with maritime boundaries and jurisdiction. So the general rule is you have 12 miles. So 12 miles off the coast is your territorial waters. It's basically, by law, part of your country. If you have a republic, so 12 miles off the coast of California, Oregon, Washington is U.S. territory, not California territory, etc. And then it kind of depends after that. So, for example, I don't know if any of y'all have been to Southern California, but we have an island called Catalina Island, which is about 20 some odd miles off the coast of California, about off of Orange County, California. Well, it's technically part of the continent of the North America, so therefore you take Catalina Island and then you go 12 miles off of that. So one of the reasons you might say, well, why do these countries care about these islands and these little peninsulas and all that? What's the big deal? Well, the big deal is that it extends your territory 12 miles off. And then there's another thing called Exclusive Economic Zone, or EEZ, which can be up to 200 miles off. So as with a lot of things, and I haven't dealt with this much in this class either, it's not what's on top. Don't get me wrong, what's on top is beautiful. Mountains, forests, and all that, and you can exploit that, but what are we really after? What's underneath? Oil, gas, gold, rubies, copper, uranium, cobalt, etc. So what's underneath the ocean? Fish, kelp, oil, salt, water, fresh water in some cases, natural gas. So it's not the water area necessarily, it's the continental shelf underneath the water that countries tend to care about. And of course, security issues. You don't really want Russian ships or Chinese ships doing donuts, 2 miles off the coast of your country in their aircraft carrier, just parking it there, right? So that 12 miles really represents kind of the technological advancement. The cannon shot rule was the old rule, up from, say, the 1500s. Technology allowed you to basically, you could only claim territory that you could actually defend. So the cannon shot rule was whatever your longest cannon was, that's as far as you could have it. Now we just say 12 miles. So when you hear people talk about the open seas or the high seas, those are any areas that are outside the territorial waters that then sort of become what in the UN they call it global commons. So if you live in an apartment, it's like the middle area of an apartment, like the laundry room of an apartment or the parking space of an apartment if you don't have assigned parking. And so that's called freedom of the seas, the high seas, the open sea. Those kind of tend to mean the same thing. Another general rule here is internal waters. So that would be the Mississippi River, some of the Great Lakes, Great Salt Lake, obviously Salt Lake City, Lake Texoma in Texas and Oklahoma, any internal body of water that you can exploit your own, that belongs to the country in which it is contained. And then if it spills over, like some of the Great Lakes, you've got to share. Merchant ships are generally welcome in port. That's called innocent passage. Warships, battleships, aircraft carriers, etc., have a general immunity in port also in a time of war. They are under law required to leave if asked. If not, they can be impounded. And then distress is kind of a general, like in America, we have laws called Good Samaritan laws. Like we want to encourage people to help people that are in distress, car accidents, etc. We incentivize that by removing liability, which encourages. So distress is the same thing. Some of that comes from the old days. I mean, no sailor wants to let another sailor drown. That's bad juju. That goes back thousands of years. Sailors generally save sailors. They were trying to kill each other 2 minutes before on the deck of the ship, but now they're floaters, and you protect a floater. So that's kind of the distress concept. We find that codified in these treaties. It's the duty of ships to help other ships, right? As much as practicable. You don't have to risk your other ship, your own ship, and your own sailors to destroy by sailing through fire to pick up floaters. But that's just it's a law of war. It's a law of peace. It's just sort of a general ocean going law. Excuse me. Gulfs and bays here. Slide 3. That's an example of an internal water. Now, some of the things that get here. So this is a picture of Delaware Bay. Now, remember, you have in the old rules, so you had 3 miles. So the opening of here, you can see the map on slide 3, Cape May to Cape Henlopen is 10-mile gap. So under old rules, that means the middle would have been open water. So 3 and 3, that means there's a 4-mile gap. Well, of course, it's ridiculous to sit there and say, okay, well, the British or French can come in the Delaware Bay and just, again, do donuts here and just park in Delaware Bay. Well, I mean, look at the geography, right? It's closed off by 2 capes. So a baseline means they literally, when they draw these treaties up, you draw a baseline between the 2 capes, and that's an internal water. So again, in a lot of times law, don't take things literally, right? Necessarily look at the there's a common sense or equity, as we like to say in the law. So those are called historic gulfs and bays. One way you would look at that is, okay, how has this bay always been used? Has it always been seen as the possession of the power dominating the region? Has it always been shared? Has it always been open? What's the sort of and so as you might imagine, those things aren't scientifically provable necessarily, but you, as like in a lot of law things, you make your best argument. And then, of course, once you put it in the treaty, it becomes recognized as an internal bay or internal water. Some examples. One here is to the Strait of Tiran and the Gulf of Aqaba. That's a picture of the Sinai Peninsula. Egypt is over here on the left. This is slide 4. Sinai Peninsula, which is part of Egypt, is right there in the middle. And then this little bay here between Saudi Arabia and Sinai is the Gulf of Aqaba. Up there at the top is Israel's only port that allows them access to the Indian Ocean. They have 2 ports. They have one at Jaffa, Haifa, up in the Mediterranean, and that one. And of course, they can't get through Suez always. And of course, given the region, the troubles in the region, so Egypt can easily shut off this Strait of Tiran here. So there's 2 things. One, there's an Israeli peace accord between Egypt in the 1970s, which guarantees it'll be open. And 2 is the UN has at least promised, and you can take that for what it's worth, I guess, depending on your views of the UN and their promises, have promised to allow or to keep the Strait of Tiran open. Why? Well, because it's not 12 miles wide. So technically speaking, Egypt has total control of the Strait of Tiran, which would keep Israel landlocked, right? So that's, not supposed to do. It's called an international strait. Has been internationalized by treaty. So, you have what the law says, and of course you have how it's played out, as you might imagine. But slide 5 deals with the zones that I just mentioned. So contiguous zones. You can enforce customs. Customs there means like taxes, not your cultural customs. Continental shelf is the underneath. If you go underneath some of these continents, you can see. So the United States is blessed with a lot of continental shelf, and then it drops off. So then you get to what's called the abyssal sea, which is a super deep ocean, 30-something thousand feet, etc. Excuse me. So continental shelf, you get exclusive for resources. Resources usually means oil, natural gas. So you see the wells off the coast of Louisiana or California or Florida in the Gulf, unless the geography is longer than that. So again, in the treaty, it's drawn up with measurements, and you take those measurements. EEZs are exclusive economic zones. And then I said the high seas, as I mentioned, that's the term in a term of art. The legal term is the right of access if you're landlocked. So if you're Bolivia or Cameroon or Ethiopia is landlocked, you have the right to access. Now it's easier said than done. You still got to make a treaty. You can't just park your ships in somebody's port necessarily, but there's that. Slide 6 is a map of the EEZs. And that shows you the difficulties at play here. When the Earth just sort of randomly came about with randomness, meaninglessness creation, it wasn't done in a geometrically convenient way. It's got lots of bumps and nooks and crannies and roundy things and all that kind of stuff that make it difficult to draw straight lines on maps and give everybody exactly 12 miles. So if you get down to, say, the Gulf of Guinea in Africa, which is right around where it curls under, you've got all those little countries. They're that narrow to scale, right? And then 12 miles. Of course, once you get in the ocean, the boundaries are harder, because where do you draw the boundaries? On the surface of the sea. So lots of agreements, conflict on where exactly those are. But you can go into that map and just sort of noodle around it, look around it for a while. I'm kind of a map nerd, so I like that kind of thing. But and then slide 7 is an area called the Global Commons. Global Commons. So the deep seabed is literally called the area. That sounds kind of silly, but if you think about just not everybody. So English is the language of diplomacy now, not French anymore. All treaties are published in 6 languages: Russian, Mandarin, English, Spanish, Arabic. There's 6. French. But the area is easy to understand, right? So the area is the Global Commons. And then if there's any mining, continental shelf issues, so again, continental shelf doesn't always match the borders on the maps. And then donut holes, you can click on that map, is basically there are some spaces in the world where there's a little hunk of ocean, which is territorial water, and there's 100 square miles of ocean, which nobody owns, which is surrounded by, it's a donut hole of I guess, absolute autonomy. No government controls that ocean. They're more just kind of a trivia question than anything. Here's an example, and I use this in my class here in California, but it highlights some of the issues. This is called the Southern California Bight. A bight is a curvature of the land on the coast. So this is up near a place called Malibu, if you ever heard of Malibu, and this is down into Orange County. There's San Clemente Island. There's a Catalina Island is down south of here. The Channel Islands are in Arkansas. So all of these are considered part of the continental shelf. So these are all part of the United States. So you take this island here, and you can go 12 miles off. And so that extends our territorial water. So if you're fortunate to have those kinds of islands off the coast, and then you can see they're relatively shallow here. Now, again, it's deeper than it looks. Obviously, if you ever come out to California, there's drop-offs. But that's continental shelf right there. In fact, here north of the Channel Islands, there are 4 oil derricks, which are defunct. That's a whole other class also. And then you can see it gets deeper here, and then eventually it'll drop off into the abyssal sea from there. Slide 9 is another aspect called seamounts or ephemeral islands. Ephemeral islands are volcanic islands. So there's a couple here. One is in the area of Tonga. It started in 2006. You can see in the upper right picture here on slide 9, you can see the volcanic eruption underneath the island, and then on top you can see the little bit that has reached the air and sort of solidified. Most of those actually break off and sink back down, hence the term ephemeral, which means, not very long lasting. This one has been around for like 15, 16 years or so. Probably the biggest one is called Surtsey. Slide 10, if you download that PowerPoint, you can watch that. It's an island off the coast of Iceland. Iceland is, of course, a volcanic island. This undersea volcano explodes and just, floods the surface of the ocean with lava, which then solidifies, and then it floats up long enough. And then, of course, now there's vegetation and all that, so, hundreds of years from now, it could be another Hawaii or another Iceland or another Japan or a Japanese island or whatever. So there's a picture on slide 11 of Surtsey today. So Surtsey Island starts in 1962, 63, so early 60s, and we're 60 years hence. And you can see from that picture, there's some, foliage there. It becomes a habitat, of course, for birds and things like that. I mean, I guess maybe down the road, if someone wants to try to build a settlement there, I don't know how you get water and electricity on that, but you never know. Divers, if you think about it in the Pacific Ocean, where the water's warmer, there's lots of Japanese boneyards there, naval ships, American warships from World War II. Divers love to go down there, and of course the schools of fish and the coral reefs and all that kind of stuff as well. Another one here, slide 12 is the Southern Ocean. The Southern Ocean is a body of water that has been more recently recognized by hydrographers and oceanographers. Most countries recognize it as a thing. The United States government does not, and this goes back to the beginning. So it's not a current administration or anything. It's just not on our. It's on maps, of course, but it's not officially recognized by the U.S. government. Why? Because you'd have to change maps, change treaties, alter things. So the circumpolar current is there on the 60s. We've seen evidence of that on the Drake Passage when we were in South America. All this huge chop and swell is caused the longest stretch of unbroken water. So that wind and the current gets around, and so oceanographers say, okay, that's kind of like a water border, which separates. So if you think about the Gulf Stream or the if you're a Nemo fan, right, the East Australian Current, the EAC, all of that sort of thing. So it's you'll see it on a lot of maps. It's not officially recognized by the United States, which still just has the Indian, Atlantic, Pacific, Arctic as the four oceans in there. But someday, if they recognize it, then it'll be legal. So these things are both legal entities as well as geographic entities, right? So I'm not going to tell you the Southern Ocean doesn't exist, because I think it does, but it's also not legally recognized, right? The Arctic, slide 13. Again, some of the problems go with having a spherical planet. How do who owns these things? So no one tends to care about these things until there's things that are there. So like the Arctic is really not exploited or discovered until 130 years ago or so. And then, of course, they find oil, diamonds. There used to be a show, I think it's still on streaming somewhere, called Ice Road Truckers. Ice Road Truckers is pretty self-explanatory. They're truckers driving on ice roads. Anyway, they're looking for diamonds for De Beers. 15 there, you get the Antarctic claims. There's an Antarctic treaty. And then I would watch these videos here, the ice and Mount Erebus, and those are from a documentary called by a guy named Werner Herzog, who's this crazy German filmmaker. The ice is about diving under the Arctic ice, and Mount Erebus is the other constantly seismic Arctic volcano, there's a picture of it there on slide 17. Anyway, that's all I got for today, and I will post exam 4 actually also later in the week, so you'll have a full week to do it. Remember, it'll be due Thursday, not this Thursday, but next Thursday, because I got to have grades in at the end of the semester coming up. So that'll be a schedule change. I'll send y'all an email to remind you. Thank you.